I'll double down on why I don't like Sveltekit now, because this was actually a thing I liked about Sveltekit that I came around on due to Astro and server components. Sveltekit strictly separates client code and server code via an API boundary. It can run your client code on the server to generate HTML, but by default, client's client, server server, and you define that boundary by putting the server code in a different file, and then the client code fetches the data from that server code in order to render the page. This clean separation is really nice. It's actually similar to what we do with TRPC and Next apps, where the backend is in the TRPC files, and then the front end is calling those TRPC functions. When you have a page file that's an actual route, like we have here, page.svelte, that data call is the data that it's getting from the parallel page.server.ts file. So whatever this returns in its async load function, that becomes the data inside of the page in that co-located thing. This is nice because the backend and the front end are fully separated at like a code level. This also makes it much easier for your compiler to handle. However, you now need to deal with the boundary here. You need a way to get the correct type from here to here without importing, because the relationship between these files isn't determined by what imports what. It's determined by the location of these files and how they're co-located. Because of that, you can't trust TypeScript to get your types correct here. You have to build something else around TypeScript in order to use that file co-location and the implementation that Svelte has made for that in order to infer the types from the server code to the Svelte file. That relationship is very complex. It seems like they've put a lot of work into making it work, and I'm pumped that they did, but you lose the strictness of that relationship. But you know what's stricter than a third-party TypeScript plugin that is constantly recompiling your files behind the scenes and checking where they're located in order to tag template literals with the correct types? Just awaiting the data in your component. The thing about the React model that's so magical, we go to the some slow component, is I don't have to do this part in another file. I can do it right here. Like const data equals await db.query select. Cool. This is just an example. If I had DB in here, I can just make the DB call here. Whatever the type of what it returns is here, and then I render it. There is no forced boundary by the framework. The boundary isn't between React and the server code. The boundary is between server components and client components, both within React's bubble. But Sveltekit contains your backend and your front end, and it has a clear boundary between these, where here's backend and here's front end, where this returns data, and this is the only place where your markup can exist. So again, the big difference here is that this returns JSON. This is where your markup happens. The new React model, in fact, we have React components where everything is within React. And here, I'll put RSCs, and I'll say this is like some small part of the complexity, and then client components. And what's cool here is these actually overlap a bit, where they have a relationship with each other, and you can do cool things with them, because all of this has markup in it. There isn't a boundary between these parts. You define the boundary yourself, and you can move it in your app depending on where you want to put it, because both of these can fetch data. Both of these can render it markup. This can fetch data on the server and can render that markup once. This can fetch data from the client or take data it was passed from a server component and render updates and have interactions and have all of these other behaviors. But this top level isn't a framework thing, it's a React thing now. That's the magic of the new React model, is Sveltekit had to exist to add this stuff to Svelte. And yes, we do need Next in order for server components to work, but Next is a very light wrapper around server components in a lot of ways. Where with Svelte, you're building a backend and you're building a front end, and it can infer the relationship between them some amount, but you can't define that relationship really. That's the magic of this model, is your components define the backend, the front end, and the relationship the two have. We're no longer forced to think about APIs as a separate thing that interface with our client. We just write the code. So that's why I like the new model, and I'm not as interested in Sveltekit. I still think Svelte itself is phenomenal. I think Sveltekit's structure and DX and the whole experience around it are incredible, and we have a lot to learn from. But the core model of server components is very exciting to me, and there's a reason I'm so hyped on it. Server components are a fantastic model, and I think if you take the time to dive in and understand, you'll be really impressed with what you can do with them. If you want to learn more about why I love this so much, I'll pin a bunch of videos on the side here, all about my favorite parts about server components and some of the cool things they changed about my thinking. Thank you guys as always. Really appreciate it. Peace, nerds.